You're listening to Rural Remix, your source for deeper, richer stories about life in rural places. This podcast is brought to you out of a partnership between Rural Assembly, a nonpartisan network of rural leaders connecting around shared experiences, and Welcoming America, a nonprofit devoted to building a nation of neighbors.
This is Roots to Roots. I'm Smo Ozawa.
And I'm Philip Norman.
Without immigration across generations, rural America would simply not exist as it does today. In this podcast, you will hear from people who have made rural America their home. Some of them are newcomers who arrived in this country recently, and others come from families who arrived here generations ago.
No matter when they came or where they came from, all of these folks arrived in rural America seeking a stable livelihood, community, and the promise of being accepted as they are. And all of them are committed to ensuring bright rural futures for all.
In an exclusive interview with NPR this past week, President Trump's chief of staff, John Kelly, said this about immigrants crossing the border illegally.
But they're also not people that would easily assimilate into the United States, into our modern society. They're overwhelmingly rural people. In the countries they come from, 4th, 5th, 6th grade educations are kind of the norm. They don't speak English, obviously, that's a big thing. They don't speak English, they don't integrate well, they don't have skills.
This introductory episode, Movement Across Time and Place, pushes back on the misconceptions about rural America and immigration like those that John Kelly voiced to NPR back in 2018. In the years since Kelly gave that interview, many rural places in America have seen a sharp population increase, thanks in large part to an influx of international immigration. In small towns across the country, these new rural Americans are driving economic growth with their skills, their resourcefulness, and their commitment to education.
The stories featured in this episode outline the patterns of immigration to the U.S. over time, the factors that influence an immigrant's difficult decision to leave home, and highlight the vital contributions that immigrants make when they find new homes in America's rural places. On Colorado's western slope, Mitch Homa speaks about the forced migration of Japanese Americans, who were held captive at the Imachi incarceration camp during World War II. Reporting for the Daily Yonder, geographer Sarah Mowat gives an overview of how immigration, both domestic and international, is playing a major role driving rural population growth.
In Fort Morgan, Colorado, the seat of Morgan County on Colorado's Eastern Plains, Taylor Jordan shares reflections from her experience working with immigrant youth like Divine Uwase and Kadro Abdi, who have accessed higher education through her nonprofit organization, College Access Navigators. You'll also hear from Sheriff Dave Martin and Susanna, whose personal histories intersect at a local meatpacking plant that has depended on immigrant labor for decades.
Veronica Ozura talks about collaborating with government and business leaders to promote immigrant integration in order to boost economic development in Sevier County, Arkansas. In rural North Dakota, you'll hear from Derek Gross, who is helping refugees resettle in declining small towns across his state.
First, Ray Suarez starts us off with historical context for these stories of immigrant life on the ground in some of America's rural places. Ray's book, We Are Home: Becoming American in the 21st Century, describes conflicting patterns of economic dependence and social exclusion that have shaped the immigrant experience all throughout U.S. history.
Hi, I'm Ray Suarez. I'm a journalist and writer, a longtime broadcaster, and the author of the book, We Are Home: Becoming American in the 21st Century. We kind of misremember on purpose that old immigrant past, that somehow there were these rules, a lot of hoops for them to jump through, that somebody from Germany or Poland, Irish or Italian, when there really weren't many, there were almost no rules until 1924. If you got here, you were pretty much in. If you look at the records kept on ports of entry like Ellis Island on the East Coast and Angel Island on the West, we sent very few people home from where they came. It got tougher for immigrants from China In the 1880s, because there was a great deal of anti-Chinese hostility, certainly on the West Coast. But really, if you came from Europe, it was pretty easy. And easy, particularly if you were from Western Europe. For the long stretch of time, from the time the Constitution was signed in 1789 until 1924, then a quota system came in. The door was narrowed but never slammed all the way shut, and it remained that way until 1965, when the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 pushed the door open again in a profound way to the rest of the world. And it's changed American demographics. It changed who comes here and from where. And it also changed the attitude of the descendants of European immigrants who found that these new people weren't always to their liking. And then, not everybody's like this, but a lot of people very unfavorably compare today's immigrant to their own great grandparents, for example, stepping around the fact that the people who are arriving today are generally better educated than the immigrants who came in the late 19th and early 20th century, far more likely to have some post-secondary education, some college level education. All power to your wonderful ancestors who agreed to farm. But let's get back to the basics. They were given a farm by the United States government, and they're being compared to people who arrive with nothing and are, in most cases, given nothing. It's a really remarkable set of adjustments that we make inside our head to denigrate today's immigrants and compare them unfavorably to the people who arrived in 1890.
Movement has always been a part of the human experience, and the story of immigration to this land starts long before the history Ray explains here. People first arrived here by crossing the Bering Strait around 20,000 years ago, developing into vibrant, distinct cultures and connected tribal nations across the continent. It's important to contextualize the creation of this country, because the drawing of a borderline and the attempted genocide and forced relocation of indigenous people by the earliest European immigrants established an ongoing pattern of displacement and exclusion that defines who gets to decide who's allowed to call America home. Whether by means of deportation, detention, or immigrant exclusion, the United States government has a long history of limiting belonging along racial lines. Mitch Homa discusses how this pattern relates to one grim chapter of this history, the unconstitutional incarceration of Japanese Americans in prison camps throughout the rural West and Midwest during World War II.
My name's Mitch Homa, and I'm the president of the all-volunteer Amachi Alliance Group. And Amachi was one of the 10 War Relocation Authority's internment camps. We support the National Park Service as well as the local, Grenada High School Amachi Preservation Society. Initially, the U.S. had the Chinese immigrants coming in and working, the railroad and various jobs. And then when the Chinese were forbidden to come in, a lot of the Japanese started coming into the U.S. to work various jobs. They were extremely successful, and they had not only farmers, but the flower growers. But the fishing industry, too, was dominant, on the West Coast was dominated by the Japanese fishermen and stuff like that. Part of the Alien Exclusion Act was limiting immigrants from Asia. When you have a group of people that works hard and a lot of success, of course, it's going to bring some animosity with it too. You see this series of displacement and isolation and removal of people from their ancestral or their home and homeland, and of course the Native American tribal populations, right? It's unfair that they were removed from their lands and put on reservations and basically isolated, right? And that's what happened to the Japanese American community. And, there's the claim of, they did it for their safety or the safety of the United States. They took babies out of orphanages and stuck them in the internment camp. What's the threat there, right? Incarcerating 80 and 90-year-old or elderly community people. It's like, what's the threat there? And if you don't know about it, right, history will continually to repeat itself, unfortunately, if you don't teach about it.
This is Sarah Malott, and I am a data editor and reporter at the Daily Yonder. Immigration is playing a huge part in a changing demographic in rural America. This is good news that rural America is not on this steady population decline trend anymore overall, and that people want to move there. It keeps vibrancy in these communities alive, and it means that people have jobs there and that they're hopefully raising families and having children and keeping traditions alive. So between 2010 and 2020, rural America saw a pretty consistent population drop. And we recently, since the pandemic, so 2020 to 2024, rural America has actually grown. And the most recent article that I wrote about this was based on figures or population estimates from the census from 2024. And I found that nearly 300,000 people have immigrated from abroad to non-metropolitan counties since 2020. And that number is responsible for most of the population growth that happened in rural America in that time. International immigration is a huge driver of population growth. We have actually seen in rural America something that demographers call natural decrease, which is when the number of deaths in a place outnumber the number of births. And so if it wasn't for people from abroad and from the US moving to non-metropolitan or rural counties over the past 4 years, we would have actually seen a decline. Of course, there are counties and regions that are consistently losing population still, but rural America as a whole is growing.
My name is Taylor Jordan. I grew up in Lakewood, and after I graduated from college, I started teaching in Fort Morgan back in 2014. And since then, I have started a nonprofit in Fort Morgan called College Access Navigators. We are a grassroots youth-led organization that supports youth in our community to envision what kind of future they want and help them in pursuing that future. It's pretty horrible the way that the immigration debate is framed right now because it really is just so polarizing. It's framed as like it's this black and white issue when really there's a lot of nuance that is in between. For me, I think the main thing that's lost is the reason people would leave their home and go to a new place. When I was teaching, there was a lot of teachers who would say, well, why do they come here if they don't want to learn English? They need to learn English. And I would kind of flip that back on them, like, why would someone come here? Like, can you think about why someone might leave their country, their home that they grew up in? Why would they leave everything they're comfortable with and everything they know? For sure, there's opportunity in it, but it's not fun. It's always for things that we can all relate on, like wanting to provide a better future, wanting to take care of your family. And so I think the empathy has been lost a lot in the current debate around immigration. Really, at the heart of our program and at the heart of the idea for this nonprofit was this idea of near peer mentors. Some of our longest standing mentors have developed these relationships that have been ongoing for years now. Two of those being Cadro and Divine. They both are currently in college, but I met them almost 10 years ago. I have gotten to watch these students, these young women, grow up into these amazing young people. And now they have returned to our program as near peer mentors who now are mentoring the next generation of students that are coming up.
Hi, my name is Kadra Abdi, and I am a student that goes to Colorado State University, majoring in political science and minoring in ethnic studies, and I'm from Fort Morgan, Colorado. We moved from Somalia. We were refugees, and we had families here, so we all moved here. That's how we kind of just came here, just for a better life and to get education, and a job. Rural America is just, it's all about, I think just working hard to, kind of achieve a dream. outsider have different opinions about it, but I think the only thing people that come here do is just to work, and like make sure that they support their family. And it's all about that, it's just like living the life that they wanted, that they didn't get a chance to back home.
I'm Divine Uwase. Right now, I'm currently going to school. I'm a student at the Colorado University, and I'm going for accounting. I grew up in a small town in East Africa, Rwanda. It was a refugee camp. It's called Gihembe, and the stress is different from the stress we have here. The stress we have there is it's like there's no much to like. There's no jobs. There's no workforce there. So it's more of like you gotta worry about like what you're gonna eat. You can't worry about education when you have to worry about food. You're more of like trying to survive. Life was hard. Because I was a kid, I didn't see it that way because that's where I grew up from. That's where I was born. I thought that was life. But then I moved, then I see like the differences. I remember like that time I was in 4th grade and then I came home and my mom was like, there's programs that are coming. There's people that just came from here and they're taking people to different countries. They were taking them to Australia, United States. So from there, we started. My mom was like, "We gonna go to United States." In 2016, it was in July. They came and they told us like, "Your plane tickets are ready." So and then that day, that's when I realized like we are actually like leaving. And I was sad, like I was leaving my grandma, my aunties, and then I was like, "Oh, like we actually not gonna come back." We had my little sister was still a baby. She was 2 years old. My mom needed daycare in order for her to go to work. After 6 months, you gonna be on your own. You have to have a job. Like you have to have it figured out, basically. So then it was like we were in there like 5 months, and then my mom hasn't found a job yet because a lot of jobs like they required you to speak English. We had an uncle here in Fort Morgan. So my mom talked to him, then he was like, it's so hard to find a job over here in the daycare. And then we only have like 1 month left. We have to figure out, but in 1 month I have to have a job. And then he was like, oh, like, what about if you guys move here? What about if you guys just move here? There's a workforce. There's a company that pays good money, and it's not bad. Well, he was talking about Cargill. That time Cargill was paying $15 an hour. And then in that time in Phoenix, the minimum wage was like $8. But you're not knowing like what type of workforce you're going to. You just think it's a job. You just came from the mind is set is so different when you just came from Africa. Her first day was the hardest. I remember she was like, it's so horrible. She was like, it's so cold and you have to use a knife. Like it's the environment is like it's horrible. It's not what I thought it was. Remember I told her, I said, you'll get used to it because there's other people working in there.
I'm David Martin, or I go by Dave. I'm the elected sheriff of the county. I've been in Colorado my whole adult life. My great-grandparents came here in a covered wagon, settled in Los Animas, Colorado. I ended up actually growing up in Denver. We had a drive-by shooting at our house one night, and we moved to Fort Morgan the next day. My grandfather was a rancher in this area and had a vacant farm. We moved out of the city and moved to rural Colorado in 1978, and I became a farm kid. The Hispanic culture's always been here, at least ever since I was a kid. I told you my grandfather was a farmer rancher, and he hired the same Mexican family every year. They came from Mexico, same family, to come and work on my granddad's farm. To hoe the beets is what it was. So I saw them. I was around them during those times. In fact, when I was a kid, I wanted a motorcycle. And my granddad said, well, you got to work for it. And he took me out there and to the family and said, you got to work with these guys. I didn't last a day hoeing beets, and I never got a motorcycle when I was a kid. I'll be honest. They worked very hard, and the same family came back every year. When I was a kid, I worked. I didn't really realize the diversity of the community other than Hispanic and white America here. as I got out of school, and I worked at Cargill Meat Solutions over here. It was Sterling beef back then, but that was a big draw for immigration here. And a refugee population, they're working in the labor-intensive industry where most white America doesn't want to work. They're in management over there, but they're not down on the floor with the knives. They're not cutting meat. There are two very large dairies right outside of town here. The immigration population's out there running their dairy. Who wants to walk around and milk cows? But I drink milk, and I'm glad they're there.
My name is Susanna. I'm the executive director of One Morgan County. I grew up in a small town named Tepetongo. We didn't have a hospital or anything like that. I immigrated over when I was about to turn 5 years old, just because of a financial situation. There was already like an economic strain in that particular area of Mexico with just ag work and that sort of thing, probably because of NAFTA and things like that. The ag communities in Mexico were really impacted. My dad had ended up going before. He was actually born in the United States, but he grew up all his life in Mexico. When he came over, he came to what was Excel Energy, which is now Cargill. And eventually we ended up coming over because he knew it was a safe community and the pay was really good.
I'm Veronica Ozura with Friends. Friends stands for Funding, Retention, and Increasing Notable Economic Development in Sevier County, longest acronym ever. Really, it's just focused on economic development. Working with the community as a whole, but our county is very high immigrant population and growing, and so we knew that we had to put a lot of focus there. Family moved here for work. Actually, my dad came whenever he was about 17 years old, went back, married my mom, and then they both came up together from Chihuahua, Mexico. Mexican families are always going to be very communal, very close-knit together. So whenever you establish one, they're just going to find comfort in having somebody else to kind of rely on and learn, especially whenever you're talking about somewhere new. It boils down to what feels safe. And I think a lot of the leadership, even though we had a lot of white leadership throughout the years, they started seeing hey, we need them here in order to survive. Because for a while there, it did get really tense. I think it was a thought of okay, maybe if we make it not a safe place, then, immigrant families are going to kind of move away. And then new American families are going to come in. It didn't work that way. And we saw a big decline. And so it's never mind, we're going to make it a really good place. Then we're going to be able to meet people where they are. And so that's turned out really well for everybody.
I am Derek Gross, the Executive Director of Catch. Catch is Communities Acting Together for Change and Hope. We're a 501c3 nonprofit in North Dakota, and our mission is to prepare rural communities to welcome foreign-born families as permanent residents. From 2010 into the early 2020s, North Dakota grew by 100,000 people. We had the oil boom. But then everybody in North Dakota who's I don't see population growth around me, they feel like they're the only one. But the fact of the matter is, all the growth is happening in these pockets out west in the oil patch, in Bismarck, and on the I-94 corridor going west towards the oil patch, and then Fargo. And Grand Forks has some growth too. And in that same time frame of great growth, many counties in North Dakota experience 30 and 40% population decline. So while those pockets are growing exponentially, the rest of us are shrinking. That's the problem and challenge we have in North Dakota, is how do we revitalize those rural communities that are dying? That's why with Catch, our focus is rural communities. Although the same needs are there, meeting those needs looks quite a bit different in a town of 400 or 500 than it does in a city of 80, 90,000. Tim Mathern, a North Dakota state senator that is very involved with the work we do, and he actually proposed the bill a couple sessions ago that created the North Dakota Office of Legal Immigration. He says his saying is, they need us, we need them. And I ride the backs of that all the time. And that's where even the people that disagree and don't like what we're doing, they can't argue that we need them. There's they throw out the number of 30,000 jobs open in North Dakota, and we have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. And I think 30,000 is low because, you go to my small town and the school needs custodians and paras, and the Senex needs cashiers, and the little coffee shop needs workers, and there's more need out there than they know. And so when I go into small towns and I present just about our organization and what we're doing, I talk about that. They need us, and so we'll talk a little bit about the difficult circumstances, refugees or people who are leaving their home to settle somewhere else. They're, usually not good things going on that are causing that. They're very difficult situations, and we need them. And so that's what we're trying to do, is take those two realities and bring them together to create good.
There's a version of the American story that highlights how communities grow stronger by collaborating across differences. By driving economic activity, making cultural contributions, and helping stitch together our social fabric, immigrant families have helped rural America survive and reinvent itself for generations.
Since the establishment of the United States by Western European settler colonists, newcomers have always faced discrimination. But in so many cases, the success of a given community has been dependent on their ability to be inclusive of all who seek home there. In the next 4 episodes, we'll hear more about how rural Americans are attempting to create this harmony, and we'll continue to explore various tensions surrounding the question of who belongs here and why. Roots to Roots is hosted and produced by Sarah Ozawa and Philip Norman. Our editor and producer is Susanna Brown, and our executive producer is Joel Cohen.
Original theme music by Alejandro Ivan Vasquez Caballero and Victor Emiliano Cano Solache. Additional reporting by Zeltzin Esmeralda Nieto Mata. Translations by Miguel Wise. Voiceover work by Maria de Los Angeles Osorio Cooper, Miguel Wise, Andrea Duarte Alonso, and Itzel Delgado Gonzalez.
A special thank you to everyone who shared their stories for this series.
And our gratitude to the staff of the Daily Yonder, Rural Assembly, and Welcoming America for bringing the series to life.